There are people in this world who are so extraordinarily skilled at pretending that the people who love them most never see what is right in front of their eyes until it is already too late. And then there are cases, rare and deeply disturbing cases, where the pretending is so calculated, so breathtakingly cold, that it forces you to stop and ask yourself a question that has no comfortable answer. What does evil actually look like when it is standing in your kitchen, making dinner for your grandchildren, offering you a drink, and smiling at you across the table, while the woman you raised from a baby is already dead in a black garbage bag in the basement directly beneath your feet? That is not a hypothetical question. That is exactly what happened on the night of February 13th, 2024, in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood near Basel, Switzerland. A neighborhood where children ride bicycles in the street on Saturday afternoons, where people wave to each other across garden fences, where the kind of violence we are about to discuss simply does not happen. Until it did. Until a father, shaking and barely holding himself together, walked down a flight of basement stairs and found a single strand of his daughter's blonde hair protruding from a black garbage bag in the corner of a cold, dim laundry room. And the man who put her there was sitting upstairs at that dinner table, chatting with him, like absolutely nothing in the world was wrong. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Today we are going into the full story of Christina Josimovic, a woman who built an extraordinary life from a chance encounter on a Swiss street when she was just 16 years old. A businesswoman, a mother, a mentor, and a woman who, behind the beautiful photographs and the curated social media posts, was quietly and courageously fighting for her survival inside a marriage that was spiraling into something sinister and increasingly dangerous with every passing month. And we are going into the story of Thomas, the man she married in August 2017, the man friends described as arrogant and cold even before the wedding photographs had been framed. The man who maintained the performance of the perfect Swiss husband and father right up until the moment investigators put handcuffs on his wrists. To understand how Christina ended up in that basement, you first need to understand who she was before Thomas ever entered her life. And that story begins on an ordinary afternoon in Basel, Switzerland, when Christina was just 16 years old and a modeling scout spotted her walking down the street. That single, unremarkable moment redirected the entire course of her life. She was signed, she began working, and 4 years later in 2007, she walked onto the stage of the Miss Switzerland pageant as a finalist, capturing the regional title of Miss Northwest Switzerland. She did not win the national crown, but what the experience gave her was something she considered far more valuable. It gave her a mission, because of what she discovered about herself in the process, and, more importantly, what she realized other women were desperately seeking. She said she was constantly being approached by people who wanted to know how to walk across a stage beautifully. But Christina understood with a clarity that speaks to the quality of her intelligence that it was never really about the walk. It was about what the walk represented. Confidence, presence, the feeling of deserving to be exactly where you were standing. In 2007, the same year she competed in Miss Switzerland, Christina founded Catwalk Coach, a consulting agency built entirely around helping women find and inhabit their own confidence. The results were real and measurable. In 2013, she coached Dominique Rindick to victory in the Miss Switzerland competition, a result that brought significant attention to her work and established her as one of the most credible voices in her field across the Swiss market. Alongside Catwalk Coach, Christina worked in IT recruitment. It was in this professional world, in the busy networked environment of corporate Switzerland, that Christina met Thomas. And from the very beginning, from the very first impressions that friends formed when Christina brought him into her social circle, there were things that did not quite add up. He came across as really introverted, very critical, and sometimes quite arrogant, a close friend later told journalists. She said she was surprised by the relationship. Christina was really in love at the beginning, but he simply did not suit her at all. That observation, delivered in the cold light of hindsight after the worst possible outcome had already occurred, is the kind of detail that makes these cases so important to study carefully. Because that friend felt something. She registered it. And yet, as happens so often in these situations, there was no framework available in that moment to take the feeling seriously enough to act on it. Thomas had a good job, He came from a wealthy family. He had a big house and volunteered with a local scout group, the kind of detail that signals community, warmth, and trustworthiness to the people around you. What was there, really, to object to? Their wedding in August 2017 appeared, to all outward observation, to be the beginning of a fairy tale. They settled into a beautiful semi-detached house in an affluent area near Basel. Christina continued to grow catwalk coach while maintaining her IT recruitment career. Her Instagram in the years that followed showed a life of real and visible beauty. Family holidays in Hawaii, ski trips in the Swiss Alps. 2 daughters, born just 17 months apart in 2020 and 2021, captured in photographs that showed a mother holding her children with the specific, uncomplicated joy of someone who knows, in the deepest part of herself, that they are the best thing she has ever done. To everyone watching, Christina and Thomas represented the couple everyone else aspired to become. Friends described them as having everything together. But behind the photographs, behind the school runs and the dinner parties and the ski holidays, something sinister was brewing. Something dark and cold was building in the space between the life Christina showed the world and the life she was actually living. And the people closest to her were only beginning to feel its palpable weight. The cracks did not appear as explosions. They appeared as small, steady erosions, the kind that are easy to dismiss individually but devastating when viewed as a pattern. Thomas's critical nature, which friends had noticed almost from the beginning, had not softened with marriage or fatherhood. He was derogatory with her in gestures, in words, and even in the tone of his voice, a friend described. He had a habit of wearing headphones at children's birthday parties, not briefly, not to take a call, but for sustained periods, removing himself from the gathering entirely while remaining physically present, leaving Christina to manage every child, every conversation, every social obligation alone, while signaling with unmistakable clarity that he considered himself above ordinary family life. Behind closed doors, the control was escalating in ways Christina initially kept entirely to herself. She was not the kind of person who complained about her marriage, a friend noted. She had been raised with a strong sense of discretion about private matters, and Thomas had learned to exploit precisely that quality in her. The criticisms had become relentless. The demands were inseparable from daily life. She tried to address it through proper channels. She proposed couples counseling. Thomas would attend and leave early. He would refuse to attend at all. He made clear through his behavior that he had absolutely no intention of changing, because changing would require admitting that something needed to change, and men like Thomas do not make that admission. The most documented and legally significant moment of violence before Christina's death occurred on July 14, 2023. Police were called to the house. When investigators arrived, they documented what federal court records later described as visible signs of strangulation on Christina's neck. There were photographs. There was physical evidence. There was documentation of what Thomas had done to his wife. And yet, as happens with devastating regularity in domestic violence cases across every country in the world, that documentation did not result in the intervention that would have saved Christina's life. Thomas remained in the house. Christina remained in the marriage. And the darkness continued to spiral. A close friend told journalists that after that incident, Christina confided in her with the careful, frightened vagueness of a woman who understood that speaking too openly about her situation carried its own dangers. She told me that she had to get police once, the friend said, but she would not tell me the details, only that he was violent and threatened her, that if she called the police, he would turn it around on her, and she would see what would happen to her then. That threat, that calculated promise of reversal, is one of the most documented and effective tools in an abuser's arsenal. It worked in this case because it was grounded in a power imbalance that was entirely real. Thomas came from a wealthy, politically connected family. Christina's family was middle class. He had access to expensive legal resources. She did not. The fear was not irrational. It was completely, tragically reasonable. The friend also shared that Christina told her Thomas had begun drinking and using drugs, that she had caught him smoking marijuana in the storage room in their basement on at least 2 occasions, that his behavior was deteriorating, and that the man who had once maintained the polished performance of the successful Swiss husband was becoming increasingly dangerous to be around. What Thomas did not know was that Christina had quietly begun to plan her escape. She was consulting with legal professionals about divorce and custody arrangements. She was organizing her finances. She was building the infrastructure of a life that did not include Thomas, carefully, methodically, and with the kind of courage that tends to be invisible precisely because it looks so much like ordinary daily functioning from the outside. Every step she took toward freedom was a step that, if discovered, could accelerate the danger she was already living with. She was walking a tightrope with her life balanced on one end and her daughter's safety on the other. Just 4 weeks before she died, Christina posted photographs on Instagram from what appeared to be a romantic couple's getaway. Her followers responded with heart emojis and comments about relationship goals. What those followers were actually looking at, in retrospect, was almost certainly not a genuine romantic gesture. It was the final act of a man controlling a public narrative at exactly the moment something far more sinister was already being planned in private. Investigators would later find evidence that Thomas had researched chemical compounds that could be used to dissolve biological material and eliminate forensic evidence. His plan was never simply to kill Christina. His plan was to make her disappear so completely that the world would conclude she had chosen to leave. He intended to stand in the aftermath as the abandoned husband, the sympathetic father, the man whose wife could not handle her life and walked away from her children without a word. That was the story he had written. Christina Josimovic was supposed to simply cease to exist. February 13th, 2024 began for Christina Josimovic the way most of her mornings began. She got her daughters ready and took them to kindergarten. She had clients scheduled, a business to run, and somewhere beneath all of it, the ongoing quiet work of building a path to freedom. She had things to do. She had people depending on her. She had her daughters, who depended on her most of all. Christina never came back to pick them up that afternoon. When the nursery staff were unable to reach her, they contacted her parents. Christina's parents, the moment they understood what was happening, knew with the terrible clarity that parents sometimes know things, that something was catastrophically wrong. This was not Christina. Christina did not go silent. Christina did not forget her children. Christina did not simply fail to appear. They drove to the house near Basel. Thomas was home, and his response to their arrival was a performance that stands as one of the most chilling documented behaviors in this entire case. He claimed he had no idea where Christina was. He offered her father a drink. Sit with that for a moment. His wife's parents have arrived because their daughter has gone missing, because her children's nursery cannot find her, because no one has heard from her all day, and Thomas's response is to offer his father-in-law something to drink. It is the kind of detail that sounds too cinematic to be real, and yet it is completely real, documented by the people who were there, and it tells you everything you need to understand about the psychological state of a man who had spent hours preparing for exactly this moment. Christina's father sat down at that table. He talked to Thomas. He ate dinner with his grandchildren. He watched Thomas tuck those two little girls, Christina's greatest pride and love, into their beds and come back downstairs and continue the conversation as though the evening were entirely ordinary. For hours, a friend later told journalists, Thomas pretended as if nothing was wrong. He chatted with her father. He made dinner. He tucked the children in. And all the while, in the basement directly below where they were sitting, in the cold laundry room at the far end of the basement corridor, Christina was already there. Already gone. Her blonde hair already visible from the opening of a black garbage bag in the corner of that room. When Christina's mother raised the idea of filing a missing person report, Thomas told them that Christina sometimes just left, just walked away without warning or explanation. Anyone who knew Christina understood immediately that this was impossible. Christina Josimovic did not abandon her children. She did not walk away from her daughters, her business, her clients, or every commitment that defined the substance of her life. The suggestion was a window into the narrative Thomas had spent time constructing. When Christina's mother attempted to call the police from inside that house, Thomas ended the call. He hung up the phone on a woman trying to report her own daughter missing. It was a move that illustrated, with cold clarity, how completely he believed he could still control the situation. He had controlled Christina for years. He was now attempting to extend that control to her family and to every available avenue of intervention. Christina's father, growing more certain with every passing minute that something terrible had happened, insisted on searching the house. He went room by room, with the desperate hope of a man praying to find nothing, praying to be told he overreacted. He found nothing, and then he went to the basement. He descended the stairs into the cold, dim light of that laundry room. The space investigators would later describe as an isolated bunker of a room far from the rest of the house. And there, in the corner, was a black garbage bag. And from the slightly open top of the black garbage bag, a single strand of blonde hair was protruding. He knew before he opened it. He approached it with trembling hands. He opened it. And the image that met him, there is the kind of image that never leaves a person for the rest of their life. He ran from that house and into the street, barely recognizable as someone still functioning in the ordinary sense of the word. A driver passing by stopped their car. His voice, by all accounts, was barely human. "Call the police." The forensic investigation that followed was extensive. The autopsy report revealed the full and terrible extent of what Thomas had done. Christina Josimovic had been strangled. Her body had then been dismembered in that basement laundry room using a jigsaw power tool, a knife, and garden shears. Thomas had also attempted to conceal Christina's mobile phone by hiding it on a delivery truck. He had researched methods of concealment and disposal. Every element of what investigators found pointed in the same direction. This was not a moment of rage. This was not an impulsive act that spiraled beyond control. This was planned. This was deliberate. This was carried out with what prosecutors would formally describe as a noticeably high level of criminal energy, cold-bloodedness, and a complete and total absence of empathy. When Christina's father returned to the house in those chaotic minutes after flagging down the passing car, when the reality of what was happening breached the walls of Thomas's performance at last, the mask finally came down. Thomas was described as gobsmacked. He had not anticipated that someone would find her that night. His plan had depended on time, on having enough of it to complete the concealment and establish the narrative of the missing wife who had simply walked away. Time had run out. He was arrested at the scene and led away in handcuffs. And in the moment when Christina's mother confronted him, Thomas's response was not grief. It was not shock. It was not the collapse of a man facing what he had done. He said, coldly and precisely, "Well, you told me you'd only come by briefly." A close friend of Christina's said it simply and exactly. "How damaged do you have to be," she said, "to not show a single emotion?" Thomas initially told investigators he had acted in self-defense, claiming Christina had been the aggressor. This claim collapsed almost immediately upon contact with the forensic evidence. The physical reality of what was found in that basement, the documented history of his prior violence against Christina and against a previous partner who had accused him of grabbing her by the neck and slamming her head into a wall, the methodical concealment he had carried out in the hours after killing her, none of it was consistent with self-defense. In March 2024, Thomas confessed, not out of remorse, but because the evidence had made the alternative impossible to sustain. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court confirmed what the behavior had been showing all along. Prosecutors described Thomas as displaying a noticeably high level of criminal energy, a lack of empathy, and cold-bloodedness. These are clinical terms. They are also perfect descriptions of a man who cooked dinner and offered drinks while his wife lay dead in a garbage bag below the floorboards. On September 11, 2024, the federal court in Lausanne denied Thomas's application to be released from custody while awaiting trial. The court's reasoning was clear. He represented a continued and serious danger. The legal proceedings remain ongoing at the time of this video, and the forensic and testimonial evidence against Thomas is, by all legal accounts, substantial. But the cruelty in this story does not end with an arrest, because there are two little girls growing up right now who need care and stability and love. Christina's daughters, born in 2020 and 2021, are at the center of an ongoing custody battle. Thomas's wealthy family, with access to expensive lawyers, is fighting for custody of those two little girls against Christina's parents, the middle-class family who cannot match them in a sustained legal battle, but who are fighting with everything they have for the right to raise their granddaughters the way Christina would have wanted. This is the ongoing injustice layered on top of the primary injustice. This is the cruelty that does not end with handcuffs. There is something that needs to be said about the systems that surrounded Christina in the final months of her life. Christina called police multiple times before February 13, 2024. There were documented incidents of intimate partner violence in the formal record. There were photographs showing strangulation marks on her neck following the July 14, 2023 incident. Thomas had a documented history of violence with a previous partner. Every element that researchers and domestic violence advocates identify as a high-risk indicator for lethal intimate partner violence was present in this case and visible in the record. And yet Christina was not safe. The interventions available to her were not sufficient to protect her. That is a systemic failure, and it is a failure that Christina's story demands we name clearly and push to change. Research on intimate partner homicide consistently shows that men with the profile Thomas presented, controlling, economically dominant, socially performative, with a documented history of strangulation, are among the highest risk configurations for lethal violence. Strangulation in particular is recognized by researchers as one of the single most reliable predictors of future lethal violence in an abusive relationship. It was documented, photographed, and filed. And Christina was still in that house on February 13, 2024. Christina saw Thomas clearly. She saw him clearly enough to consult lawyers. She saw him clearly enough to confide in friends during the final 12 months of her life, breaking a long-held silence because the situation had become too dangerous to contain alone. She was doing everything that advocates recommend. She was accessing legal advice. She was documenting. She was reaching out. She was doing all of it while raising 2 daughters under the age of 4 and running a business and managing the daily reality of living alongside someone she knew was dangerous. That is an extraordinary level of courage under an extraordinary level of pressure. And it was not enough. The system did not catch up to what Christina already knew. The women Christina helped through Catwalk Coach over 17 years represent a legacy that outlasts everything Thomas tried to destroy. He did not just try to take her life on February 13, 2024. He tried to take her story, to replace the truth of who she was with a fiction about a woman who abandoned her family and disappeared. The father who walked into that basement and found that strand of blonde hair did not just discover a crime. He saved his daughter's story from being swallowed by the story her killer had written for her. Christina Josimovic was 35 years old. She had 2 daughters aged 3 and 4. She had a business she had built with her own hands from a chance encounter at 16. She had a life that was, by every meaningful measure, worth fighting for. She was fighting for it. She deserved to finish that fight on her own terms. She deserved to walk out of that house with her daughters and build the life she had been quietly and carefully constructing in the background. She deserved more time. She deserved better from the systems that had her name in their records and her photographs in their files and still could not keep her safe. If any part of Christina's story resonates with something in your own life, if any element of the control, the criticism, the isolation, the fear of what leaving might bring sounds familiar to you from the inside, please reach out. In the United States, you can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline by calling or texting 1-800-799-7233, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You do not have to be in immediate physical danger to call. You do not have to have a police report or a photograph of an injury. You just have to feel afraid in your own home. That is enough. Please call. Thomas gave the performance of the perfect husband and the perfect father for years. He maintained it through everything. He maintained it on the evening of February 13, 2024, through hours of dinner and conversation and tucking children into bed, with his wife already dead in the basement below. But performances end. They always end. And when this one ended, when that father walked down those stairs and found what was in that black garbage bag, it ended with the full and terrible weight of everything Thomas had done crashing down on a family, a community, and every woman watching from the outside who had believed the performance completely. To the friend who mentions, just once, quietly, that things are not right. To the police report that documents strangulation and does not result in removal. To the pattern that is always visible in retrospect and should be visible before. Christina's story asks us not just for grief, though grief is entirely appropriate, and not just for outrage, though outrage is entirely warranted, but for action. Because somewhere right now there is another woman who is afraid. And the only thing standing between her and the outcome Christina faced is whether the people and systems around her choose to pay attention. Rest in peace, Christina Josimovic. Your daughters will know your name and who you were. Your story will not be erased. If this story moved you, Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you never miss our next video. And if this story moved you, share it, because Christina Josimovic's story deserves to be heard. We will see you in the next one.